Hello there. Today, 29 June 2023, the Supreme Court in the United States strike down the use of affirmative action in college admissions across the United States of America. It is amazing that there is a video that I made before I knew of that news or any actions of that matter happening in the United States that did highlight on uh, affirmative action policies, but I was specifically targeting Zimbabwe, thinking about Zimbabwe, not knowing that as I was speaking in the very first time, and the very same time in the United States, the Supreme Court was handing down a judgment that was affecting the very same issue I was making a video about, trying to show you how well connected the Holy Spirit is with the events that are happening in the world at the same time. Approaching the world through me in a way that I, the prophet or the speaker, were not aware or conscious of. Effectively, the Supreme Court judgment in the United States states that uh, when universities consider college admissions, they are no longer allowed to factor in the race of the applicants. Of course, that affects Black and Latino students who, because of their historical um, of their historical context, find it very difficult to access uh, uh, college education or any other items that can position them for better upward mobility. So that is something that we are grappling with in Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe as a country. And I am going to show you the video that that I recorded. So I'm making this one first, and after this video, you're going to see the original video that I've made for the purposes of posting, where I am talking about how Zimbabwe's progress is being derailed by the British foreign policy arrangements on the basis of our color as Black Zimbabweans. The upward mobility of the country itself has been hindered by policymakers in the British Foreign Office for the purposes of hindering Zimbabwean people, Black people particularly, as a country from progressing. It is the same thing, the same theme that you see in South Africa and across the rest of Africa. But being someone who is resident in South Africa, I'm seeing also that how Black South Africans are mistreated in the country of their birth by white descendants of British colonialists who make it difficult for upward mobility to occur amongst the Black population because of the color of their skin. I highlighted in some videos that in 1963, when Nelson Mandela was at the Rivonia trials, one of the key issues that he brought up was that 2 Rand 57 or 2 Rand 59, I'm not sure, on average is spent on a white kid, but comparing that with 19 cents spent on a Black kid, which obviously means that in the future our education outcomes are going to be different owing to our skin color. And we have got parties like the Democratic Alliance in South Africa, which is known to be a pro-white party, promoting meritocracy, which is similar to what the Supreme Court in the United States passed today. Well, the Democratic Alliance argues that we in South Africa must employ people that who are qualified for jobs and not factor in affirmative action. Is the same thing that the Supreme Court in the United States uh, 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 ruled in favor to eliminate the college's abilities to factor in the race of applicants. So it is strange to me that um, we still face such kind of backlash in year 2023 as black people, as we try to advance in the world. And then as you can see that this war against the black success, Latino success, or the success of minority races, or the races that are deemed to be lesser than the white supremacist mindset. So we see that war is still raging on in the United States, in the heartland of democracy, in the heartland of freedoms there in the United States. So therefore, it's quite interesting that that is happening today in the United States. At the same time, I am talking about the same effects of the racism, the institutionalized racism that Zimbabwe as a nation is facing from its former white colonial country, which is Britain. Therefore, I would like to implore the world to get to understand and to investigate this thing thoroughly of how this racism does not only affect black individuals or Latino individuals in the United States, but also black individual countries. And my argument is on Zimbabwe as a country has been systematically been attacked by Britain because Zimbabwe is a black country. But if we were not a black country, but we're in the Commonwealth, for example, like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, which are white countries, they do not get the same attack, not even same level. They don't even get attack at all. What they get is assistance so that their governance systems prosper and so that their people can prosper and excel in the world. All that is done because they are white countries. That is my argument. And my argument is that because Zimbabwe has been failing because ZANU-PF is a terrible party and Robert Mugabe was a bad man. No, no. And on the contrary, Robert Mugabe was a great educator. And it is the fact that the black excellency of Robert Mugabe was attacked by the British government purposefully for the purposes of creating a pariah state that is not able to raise generations of black people, black Zimbabweans that can inspire the world and part of dominate different fields in science, in mathematics, in economics, in sporting events, in anything that you can think of because they are black people. So what I am saying is that the British government has sponsored these foreign policy arrangements together with some voices in Washington who are strong allies of Britain and strong allies of purporting to be human rights advocates or advocates for good governance, democratic movements in countries like Zimbabwe, where in actual fact they are hiding behind a nefarious agenda of keeping countries like Zimbabwe in the doldrums of poverty by doing what Warren Buffett speaks of when he says that if a police officer follows a driver for 1,000 kilometers, they will at some point give them a ticket. So what these guys do is they followed Robert Mugabe for 1,000 kilometers and try to look for any fault, and then they say here it is, human rights abuses, therefore we're going to have sanctions on Zimbabwe. This is the kind of unfairness that we see, what we receive as African people, as black people. We feel aggrieved that the foreign policy of Washington and that of the United Kingdom squarely uses those kind of loopholes to advance an agenda that is anti-black people, not just black governments, but the black people that the black governments are governing. Hence, I'm saying, as Ngobani Zondo, as I am running to lead a government in Zimbabwe, a government for black people, by black people, for the purposes of advancing interests of the black population of Zimbabwe. My argument is that the black Zimbabweans also do have a right of participating in the global economy. Right now, our sanctions that are levied, supposedly leveled on the ZANU-PF regime, but however, practically speaking, they have been affecting me and my fellow black Zimbabweans. And my argument is that it was deliberately done so by the Washington consensus together with their British partners in order to to keep to chain the dragon, which is Zimbabwe, or to chain these great powerful people of Zimbabwe, whom they recognized as a threat in global affairs because of what Robert Mugabe had done a stellar job in educating us as black Zimbabweans, and that scared the living hell of the white supremacists in Britain and their fellow sympathizers in Washington, who made sure that they had come up with what they call Zidera sanctions, that are called targeted sanctions, purporting to be targeting an oppressive regime in Zimbabwe led by Robert Mugabe, the ZANU-PF regime. True enough, there was oppression. True enough, there was disrespect for human rights and limited democratic I mean, there was limited democracy in the country. But my argument is that the issue of Zimbabwe's abuse of human rights is not peculiar to Zimbabwe alone, but is something that is prevalent throughout the whole world, including right in the heartland of democracy itself, the United States. Yet Zimbabwe was specifically targeted, I argue, for the purposes of limiting the glory of black Zimbabweans, and it made the white supremacists very afraid. So we see today in the Supreme Court in the United States, when the Supreme Court's judgment is trying to downplay the significance of our struggles as black people, and the fact that even today in 2023 it's difficult for black people or Latinos and other racial groups that are deemed to be lesser than to be able to succeed and excel in the world. And that is in the same theme that we have with Zimbabwe as a country now, not just as not just as individuals in the United States who are applying for college admissions. Now I'm talking about Zimbabwe as a country which is applying for admission in the world, in the free world, because I envision, or I have got a vision for Zimbabwe, bringing Zimbabwe into the free world, bringing Zimbabwe closer to Washington more than any other country. I'm talking about pivoting our politics towards Washington, joining the free world, but as black people. Well, my argument is that we don't have to be white like Canada, we don't have to be white like Australia, or white like New Zealand to be admitted in the global village, where we want also to be a pro-democratic state, a state that respects rule of right, and a state that exists to build and its own people, its own citizens, and to build their integrity, and also respect and build the dignity of the black men and women in Africa. So why what I am seeking is that we, as a black Zimbabwe, be admitted as black as you are, and asking the Washington policymakers, perhaps Joe Biden, as he is seemingly a progressive who also finds something concerning about this Supreme Court judgment today. Perhaps he will also have the ability to recognize that countries like Zimbabwe, like with black people, have also been hurt by these US Zedera sanctions in that were supposed to be targeting the government. Yet in actual fact, they are nefarious ways of targeting the whole black population. My name is Ngobani Zondo, and I hope that you in Washington and all over the world can be inspired by what is happening in the Supreme Court today and begin to take measures, policy measures, diplomatic measures between Washington and London and the Buckingham Palace in order to uproot the Rhodesians who have been ill advising the British on their policy stance against the black Zimbabwean. I hope that the progressives in the Democratic Party and in the broader Washington society would be able to understand where I am coming from and begin to see the benefits that the whole world can reap if Zimbabwe, a black nation of Zimbabwe, is allowed to enter this global group of countries that respect rule of law. If we do not do that, we see Zimbabwe and other countries, in particular South Africa, which is now falling towards aligning themselves with Russia, which is really falling from grace, because South Africa was one of those anchors or examples of great democracy, but we still are there in South Africa. But saying that it's the country itself and other countries in Africa are more leaning towards Russia, autocratic regimes that do not respect rule of law and disrespect the rules-based order that the international community espouses for. So if Washington allows Britain to carry on doing what it is doing to Zimbabwe and other African countries, and allows France to do that to the Francophone countries in Africa, do not be surprised when we see these African countries leaning towards Russia, not because they hate not because they hate the rules-based order, but because they feel like they are being destroyed by the leaders of the free world themselves. However, the danger is that they are falling into the arms of another more dangerous person, which is Vladimir Putin, who lives in Russia, that is already at it attacking Ukraine with the intention of taking back the Soviet bloc and also taking back the rest of Europe. My concern is that in a situation like that, we will have a global order that is led by Russia, and I do not think that our human rights, all of us in the world, will be safe in the hands of that group of people like that. So for Washington to recognize that the war in Africa has to be won, Washington have got to recognize that it is time to bring in black countries, therefore, into this group of the global our consensus on human rights, free world order kind of pivot. So therefore, I intend as Ngobani Zondo to bring my country into that group. But the problem with that group is because countries like Britain and some voices in Washington that do not want to see black countries succeed or becoming part of that. But they do not understand that when we do not let these black countries succeed, we are sending them into the arms of Russia, arming Russia with a lot of access to the whole African reach that he is going to use to attack the very Europe and the very America that is aspiring to fight against the Russian problem that they are facing. So King Charles, if you really intend to fight Vladimir Putin, you need to understand that you need to fight yourself, the demon within Britain itself. That I implore, therefore, the United Kingdom to fight its own demon, which is the undermining of the rights of black countries and the misunderstanding of black people, the mistreatment of black Africans in the political field. Because if you do not understand what I am saying, King Charles, this will come biting, and it is already biting, because Wagner Group and Russia are already having access of African resources that they will use to wage a war against the broader Europe. So a smarter Europe will espouse or will desire or work towards a brighter future for Africa. The choice is yours, therefore, gentlemen. My name is Ngobani Zondo, and I am running to be a leader of the Republic of Zimbabwe as we forge a way forward of bringing our country to success. Have a great evening. And I will attach the video that I have been talking about from the start. Amen.